to the Motorsport Review, the Formula One podcast, where we talk about all sorts of things, including Formula One, but also other series around the world and try and shine a bit of light on them. This week's the turn of Formula E. So joining me, unfortunately, is not Ray. Wishing her all the best. She's not feeling very well, but I do have a friend in the form of Amy. So hello, Amy. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Perry. No problem. Everyone.
And we were actually at Autosport this weekend as well, enjoying all sorts of other motoring going on there as well. So that was a good event, a good thing to go to really launch the season. And we've both heard Crofty say it's lights out and away we go. So it feels like it's into the season already. Yes, we're midway through January. Still a few months to go until we properly get Formula One in action. But of course, there's no shortage of motorsport that's out there. So as I say, we're talking about Formula E today. We've got the Dakar Rally is currently on. And at the end of the month, we've got the Daytona 24. But if I can start, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone that has already listened to episode 1 and 2, our introduction, and the first half of our Formula One 2024 season review. I was expecting maybe 5 people to have listened. It's upwards of 6. So thank you all very much for listening and all the positive feedback that we have had on that. And we'll continue to push out more content now that we're into the new season. So a bit of a disclaimer. I'm talking on behalf of Amy as well as myself and Ray, of course, is that when we're talking about these other series, we're not going to be particularly like the most clued up, if you will, about Formula E. We're talking as fans, mainly as fans of Formula One, but we're both fans of Formula E. And Amy, we were actually at the London ePrix last year, so I feel like we're pretty high level ranking fans, having seen it in person as well.
Yeah, we are indeed high ranking. I'm not sure if I would give myself that label just yet, but there's certainly a lot going on in Formula E to keep up with.
There certainly is, yes. So there was a Sao Paulo I need to say Grand Prix. That's a faux pas in Formula E terms, but the Sao Paulo ePrix kicked off the season in December, and this is actually the 11th season of Formula E. So it's already sort of a well-established racing series, but it's still also growing. So there's things we're going to talk about later on about how it's already grown, how we've got a new car this season, and how there's still more to come. The one big starting point for me about this is how we watched it. Now, we're both in the UK, so we're very lucky now that we are able to watch it on ITV free to air. And I wanted to bounce this off you. I felt last year when it went to TNT and behind a paywall that it might signal the beginning of the end for Formula E. And thankfully, they made it through. They made the right decision and they've brought it back to live to air. So what did you think? What did you think about that? Did you agree with that it was the wrong decision to go behind a paywall and that it's the right decision now it's back on free to air TV?
Yeah. So for me, firstly, I don't have TNT, so it was a challenge to keep up with Formula E last season. I do understand why certain motor series, why they might need to commercialize, sell rights, generate more income. I absolutely understand that. I kind of feel though with Formula E, just my view, that perhaps the fan base wasn't quite there yet, wasn't quite addictive enough to then pay however much it was to subscribe to TNT. I think there's kind of a sweet spot in terms of when something does go behind a paywall, whether it keeps fans engaged or not. With Formula E in the UK, certainly, I'm not sure that it's quite there yet.
No, I didn't think it was. I mean, up until McLaren joined, we're both McLaren fans, so that might be discussed as well. But until McLaren joined, I was maybe sort of a casual viewer, dipped in and out. I went to London for season 2, I think it was, and if honest, back then it was still really finding its feet, and I was a little bit disappointed, but kept with it, kept watching. Then it went behind a paywall, and honestly, I didn't watch very much of last season at all. The first full race I watched was when we were in London for the Saturday to watch that race. That was the first time I'd watched the full ePrix. So it's really nice now that it's back. It kind of, the what's the phrase? Absence makes the heart fonder. So now that it's back, I'm more willing to give it that time and say yes, I want to watch every race fully, we'll record it live and make sure that I am watching it. So I think that was a massive positive move that they made, putting it back on the TV free to air in the UK, especially where we are. But the next point I wanted to get to was the circuit layout. So obviously it was in Mexico. We have the Formula One track, and that's what's lovely about this podcast. When we get to compare things directly, it's a bit more straightforward. So they don't use the same track, but I'm going to put this opinion out to you, Amy, and see whether you agree with this. I think the Formula E circuit that they use in Mexico suits the racing better than the Formula One circuit in Mexico suits Formula One, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, absolutely get it. In fact, when I was just forcing my partner to watch the race again about an hour ago, he's like, oh, is that the F1 circuit? So I think there's some like nostalgia about that for us as fans to recognise it. But it's certainly made for some interesting racing over the weekend, and I'm sure we'll come on to it. So yeah, kind of think it's perfect for Formula E then in terms of what it delivered when we compare that to what we've experienced in Formula One. But in general, they're such different series, and Formula E has so much more overtaken and opportunities to move up the grid and that type of stuff that generally I find it hard to compare the two anyway. Certainly does suit Formula E though.
That's what I was very keen to say, that the Formula E track suits Formula E. I think if you did a complete swap, then it would be the worst of both. Formula One wouldn't suit the Formula E track. Formula E wouldn't suit the Formula One track. You spoke a bit about nostalgia, and what I really love about the layout is the Perotada, the final corner coming round onto the start-finish straight. Fans of Formula One from the 80s will remember that, especially I've got the memory of Nigel Mansell in the Williams firing around that corner at full speed. The Formula E cars weren't quite at full speed, which was brilliant because they're all taking it differently, especially during the race when they've got attack mode, when they haven't got attack mode, trying to get a good exit onto that start finish straight. And the stadium returns, but there's actually action in there. I feel like it's a really key part to the Formula One that they go into the stadium. It's probably the best view in Formula One, I would argue. But again, it doesn't really lend itself to a lot of action actually happening in there. Whereas Formula E, you've got an ever tightening corner and you've got attack mode. As I say, I think it's one of the best circuits possibly on the Formula E calendar for that. So it was a good one for us to focus on here. The weekend format. So pretty much everything runs on the same day. There's a practice session on the Friday, which there's no fans for. Perhaps it's more of a media day. But again, thinking about the fans in that stadium, by the time the race comes around, they've seen practice, they've seen qualifying, and they then get to see the race. But the qualifying itself, I wanted to highlight on again. I think the qualifying format in Formula E is better than Formula One, but I don't know whether they could do a swap. I don't know what your thought on that is on the qualifying.
I really like the qualifying style that they have in Formula E. For me, it's kind of with the two halves as well. It kind of reminds me more on how IndyCar does qualifying, and then kind of takes it that step further with the duels.
I think at this point we probably should highlight what the format is. Forgot to really say that rather than just giving our opinion. That's my fault, Amy. Sorry for leading down there. But yes, as you say, there's two groups. They're split into half. and in each half of the group they're trying to get into the top 4, so that the top 8 go through into duels. So they fight in quarterfinals. It's a straight head-to-head, 4 quarterfinals, 2 semi-finals, and then the final determines that front row of the grid. And as you say, it's very reminiscent of IndyCar, where they have that shootout and they have a fast 6, don't they? But yeah, the head-to-head. And this was an idea actually put forward by Sam Bird, I believe, a few years ago. It's his sort of creation, if you like.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I really like this, the format that they have. And if we talk about specifically about the Mexico ePrix as part of our review, then we saw a Porsche lockout. So they looked pretty ominous after qualifying. You had as I said, Porsche 1-2 at the front of the grid. Their line now has 2 poles from 2 races. So if you're out there looking for someone to follow and you haven't quite made up who that is, obviously we're both going to point you towards McLaren. But if you're a bit of a glory hunter, maybe looking for someone that's going to score you pole positions, then Verline's looking like the man to beat in that format at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think the first race for him perhaps was a blip, but it's certainly picking up from where we left off, I guess, last year. I think in terms of the qualifying format for me, it's kind of it's really exciting. I really like the fact that it's kind of unique. I don't know if there's any other series that do it. Maybe as I keep watching this podcast, I might discover another one that does it. But not that I know of. The only like slight drawback for me, this probably sounds like a bit of a strange comment from a racing fan, is that it takes quite a long time. You know, the period of qualifying from when like Group A starts to actually when the pole position shootout finishes is like quite a long time. I feel like it takes up quite a chunk of your day when there's a race to come afterwards as well. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it turns that
certainly.
positive that I spoke of, that you get to see qualifying and racing on the same day. I agree with you. In London, you're sort of sat there going, what's happening now? Because they sort of have to sit and do all the stewards' decisions, make sure they've got the top 8 that they need before they send anyone to the end of the pit lane. And so they're just all shuffling it all out, working it all out, and you're sat there going, there should be cars on track, there should be something happening. Then the quarterfinals happens. There's 8 cars go whizzing by you, and then it's the same thing again. It's like a bit of a break, which obviously Formula One has with their Q1, Q2, Q3. But there's always stuff going on, and it's a really short break between them. So yeah, I agree. It does take a long time, and maybe again in years to come they'll keep the format, but find a way to condense it down. But we'll see on that one. So into the race then, and as I say, we had a Porsche lockout on the front row, which kind of dictated how the start of the race went. So the 2 of those leading out front, dictating the pace, the energy use, because that's really where Formula E racing gets its excitement from, is how drivers and teams manage their energy. Now I know there's a lot of Formula One fans that are probably going to sit there and go, "Oh God," they get into the bit where they talk about electricity over natural engines and petrol burning engines. But I think it's a great thing that we have Formula E. I think it's a great thing that we have electric racing, and I think it adds excitement. I really think if you're one of those people that sat on the fence going, I can't watch Formula E, I can't take the noise, I can't take the electric, I honestly beg you, please go and give it a go. What do you think on of that sort of strategy element and that management of the battery?
Um, it's quite interesting for me, and it's not something that I really appreciated until the last couple of years, where, like you, I've been watching Formula E more regularly. Um, you know, it's very much akin to fuel saving. It's a source of power and whatever the racing series is, they all need a source of power. So it's not kind of like it is like what it is. It's no different. In response to people perhaps complaining about the noise and that horrible kind of squealy sound that it might get described as. Actually, it kind of, you get past it very quickly. And I appreciate not everyone can get to a Formula E race, but also when you're there, you notice it even less. You hear the noise that it makes when a car is driving around the track. You know, you don't hear the nasty noise, or it just pales into the background.
I remember
Not something I
being
noticed.
sat. I remember being sat watching the practice session, and again, we sort of glossed over that because it's just practice and you can't tell much about it. But actually, being sat where we were at turn one, immediately you could tell who was hooked up on the setup and who wasn't, because there were cars coming in squealing, locking up the brakes, cars out of, you can hear the tires
Yeah,
under load, and there are other cars that were just flying through much quicker, making barely any tire noise as they went through. The car was just much more compliant, so you can hear things that you wouldn't normally hear. And again, going back to season 2, I think it was, when I was at Battersea Park, I heard a car lock up and immediately turned. There was no one in front of me. This was during qualifying, I think it was. Though again, there was very few cars on track, and then realised when we saw it on the screen that it was Sam Bird, I believe, at the time driving for Edams, that had locked up the other side of Battersea Park. So you hear a lot more and you can pick up a lot more. So as I say, that noise element isn't such a problem at all for me.
yeah. I think you've articulated that much better than I did, by the way. You can just hear all the other noises that the car makes, can't you? Yeah.
That's it.
It's not
And
the smell of the noise of the burning fuel.
that's it. The tires definitely give a smell, don't they? As they get used more and more through the day, you start to hear the rubber, smell the rubber more as the day goes on. And yeah, you mentioned about management as well, and it's the same sort of argument I get or used to hear from Formula One fans with regards to the tires, because Formula One is more about managing tyres. You see drivers sort of driving 5-6 seconds slower than they would do in qualifying, because simply they've got to make the tyres last 20 laps. So there was this argument that went round, they should give the teams and drivers tyres that they can just push from lap one, just push constantly. And I used to say to people, okay, great, but then there'll be something else that they'll have to manage. There's always something else. Whatever sport we cover, motorsport, sorry, on this podcast, I'm pretty sure that the management of X, whatever X is going to be, is always going to come up. And in Formula E, it just so happens to be the batteries, but there was a little bit of talk of tyres again as well. So yeah, it's part of the racing. So Porsche did that very well as the start. As I say, they were managing everything, and then Taylor Barnard of McLaren, first driver to take attack mode. And I think we've spoke about this briefly before. As soon as one person takes attack mode, it is a little bit confusing from that point as to where people are in the order. What did you think of that? As someone that watched the race a couple of times, I think you said, just to try and
Yeah,
understand what they were seeing.
yeah. Absolutely. I still haven't got there yet in terms of understanding what's going on, understanding what the strategy is behind who goes early and who goes late, and and I'm quite guilty, though. I've realised in watching a race and just looking out for certain drivers. I don't know, say the McLaren drivers, the drivers who might be in the championship, that type of thing. When you're watching a race and trying to understand what's happening with everybody, like my mind's just blown a little bit. So it does it does make it a bit confusing for me. It might be because I'm not that knowledgeable yet and don't always understand the strategies, but
I'm sure it's not
I've
that.
watched, yeah, I've watched Sao Paulo twice as well. And I still don't understand how Taylor Bannard got that podium. You know,
Yeah.
it's
So I was thinking about this today, and the only thing I can sort of picture was that the attack mode, it came up on the screen on the visual that attack mode was going to cost the drivers about 1.7 seconds. I think we're quite used to seeing a pit stop in Formula One and a driver shuffling down from like first, second, third, shuffling all the way down to eighth, ninth, 10th, because they've had to cost themselves 22 to 24 seconds in a pit stop. So losing less than 2 seconds to take attack mode, you might see them shuffle down just one place. And I think that's then when you go, well, was that because they took attack mode? Was that because they genuinely got overtaken? But I wasn't also sure whether it was the on-screen display. But you might know more about that. The you know what I'm talking about, the stack on the
yeah,
left-hand side.
yeah. I think it's I, I don't know if it's necessarily delayed, but it uses certain points in the circuit, you know, and then when the drivers go through that certain timing point, the track positions update, because sometimes I'm watching and you see a driver take attack mode live, so you see them drop back 2 places, and then I look at the timing screen and I see them tumble down again, and I'm like, oh, has something happened, or has the timing screen just caught up with what I've already seen? Um, that's really
Yeah, it is.
helpful, though. Likening it to a pit stop, it's just kind of like we're used to pit stops. We know how they work. Um, yeah, quite confusing. I'm still not there yet with understanding uh, exactly what the right strategy is. And I think sometimes it's a bit of a gamble. I think we saw that in this race. I won't jump to the end, but yeah, I think sometimes it's about timing and is that luck or judgment? Don't know the answer to that. Don't think
Neither do
Nissan will
I.
tell us the answer either.
I mean, it came up on again to talk about what we saw on the screen. You had the virtual race engineer came up and said, "Oh, they should use a 4 and 4." And initially, I was like, "What's a 4 and 4? Like, I should know that." But again, to explain to people that maybe don't follow Formula E just yet, they have 2 attack modes that they have to use. They have to drive through a certain sector, and I quite like this. I think it's a little bit of a gimmick, but I think it's a good one to have. That they have to drive off the racing line, around the outside of a corner, lose time, but gain attack mode, and they have 8 seconds that they have to use twice over. And I explained that badly. They have 8 seconds total over a race, and they have to activate it
Eight
twice.
minutes.
8 minutes. 8 minutes. Sorry,
Yeah,
yes, eight
it's all
seconds
right.
would be very good. 8 minutes, and they either have to take it 2 minutes and 6 later in the race, or they take 4 and 4, or they can use up 6 minutes and then only have 2 later in the race. And as you say, it's a big part. When do you take them? Because there's no limit. I think you can take them on lap 1, but you have to have used all of those minutes. You can't take it on the last lap, for instance, and then cross the line with time still to go. They'll get a penalty. So trying to time it, trying to not go too early, try not to use too much. There's a lot of strategy in that, probably more, I would say, than in Formula One as a result. Um, as I say, I don't know if you think it's the same way. I touched on the gimmick word there. I don't know if you feel the same, whether it's a good thing that they've got attack mode in Formula E. As I say, I'm positive for it, but how do you feel about it?
Um, I think they need something. I think we kind of touched on this earlier a little bit when you talked about how, you know, um, all series have like different variables and different things that they have to manage, and it becomes another thing, another variable that impacts on how a race goes, and the result of the race. Absolutely thought it was gimmicky and thought this is ridiculous, forcing someone to fall further down the order in order to get that advantage back. I've got my head around it now. I thought we saw some really good examples in the race just gone about how it can be maximised with teams working together to ensure that they didn't fall back down the grid. One thing that I just remembered though, that I think stopped a couple of years ago, I'm sure there used to be an even more gimmicky thing where I think fans could vote, and the winning driver got extra power. Now that is definitely a gimmicky thing that I'm not up for. So if we compare it to that, it's improved. Getting to a good place.
Yes, there's two things. That was one of the ones I was going to come to.
Sorry.
No, it's good. You brought it up. Brilliant. No, the fan boost. You're right. It actually became fan boost because so basically 5 drivers win a popularity contest, which people could phone in or text in and give their 5 favorite drivers an extra boost, kind of like attack mode during the race, where they get extra power once, I think it was, during the race. And as I say, it was called Van Boost because Stoffel Van Dorn, without fail, got it every single time. And talk of gimmicks, I mean, that was bad. I'm particularly glad myself that that's gone. And the other thing I was going to talk about was having to stop and swap cars. I'm also glad that that's gone. When we talk about gimmicks, that was a bad look for Formula E. So I think if we take those out and we've now got attack mode, then I think it's good. I think it's going the right way. But one thing I also want to get to that I think will be even better is when they bring in attack charge. Now, do you know about this, or do you know of it?
No, but you are going to explain it to me very well, I'm sure.
We'll see. But this is what I'm most looking forward to when they bring it in, because of course, motorsport is about, or a big part, trying to bring technology from the racetrack, advance it on the racetrack to bring to the real world. Now, when it comes to electric charges, you've got these naysayers, of course, that go, yeah, but I can go and put fuel in my car and be back on the road in 30 seconds. Whereas if I've got an electric car, I've got to charge it and it's going to take me 30 minutes and I've got to stop and have a meal because it's going to take so long. And that's if a charger is available. Well, attack charge was meant to come in for season 10. And I thought it was meant to be in from the start of season 11, but it's where they will come into the pit lane, they will stop for 30 seconds, and in that 30 seconds, they will get 4 kilowatt hours charged back into the battery, which is a significant amount of power, which will then in turn activate 2 attack modes when they leave. So we were talking earlier about how you only lose 1.74 seconds at certain tracks to attack mode, but I think when they actually come in and they stop for 30 seconds, it will be easier to watch and it'll be more relevant as well. So yeah, look forward to attack mode, hopefully attack charge being introduced this year. But as I said, I wasn't sure if you'd heard of that or
Yeah, now you've described it, I'm kind of like, yes, I know what you're talking about now, but I just don't think I remembered what it was called. But yeah, absolutely though. In all motorsports, I think the research that teams put into development of stuff like attack charge can only be a good thing in terms of translating to something that we can, ultimately use in road cars in some way, shape, or form. But I think that sounds much easier to understand and kind of, I think it sounds less gimmicky just because it's something that makes sense. You
yeah.
drive into the pit over something something that that charges a car and you see it happening, rather than at the moment where you have to go off the racing line, and it's like driving over those couple of lines that you need to gain attack mode doesn't physically do anything to the car other than trigger something. So
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like the old refuelers. So they have like a two-handle prong that they push into the back of the car. So it'd be very, as you say, it'd be very visible that they see. It won't be just be that the car stops in the garage on something. Because again, if you couldn't see it happening, I don't think it'd be as real. But to see someone actually put the charger into the car, I think will be good to see when that comes about. So so yeah, we started seeing drivers taking attack mode, and say different people taking it at different times. And then you pointed out that later on that led very nicely into some late safety cars and how strategy played out. Now, again, I think this is very similar to Formula One, where you see the leaders tend to be the ones that pit later because they don't want to stop, cost themselves track time, and then safety car comes out just at the wrong moment. So it's very similar. I quite like that it was Taylor Barnard that stopped first because he was running towards the back, helped by Sam, who had qualified about mid-pack, qualified 10th, I believe. Bit of teamwork from McLaren got him up to 10th before he got a penalty by the end. But yeah, they like to leave it as late as possible. I think we saw, so the Porsches were the last to do it, and they'd slid down a little bit and allowed Jake Dennis through to the lead before we got the first safety car. And I wanted to make another point about Formula E that I think they get a lot better than Formula One, and that is Scott Elkins, race director. And when we saw the car crashed, and then we heard Scott Elkins on the telemetry, on the feed, and to all of the teams telling them there was a car crashed at turn 10. We will go to a full course yellow light safety car. And he's counting down, and you hear this. And you might be better at saying this about IndyCar as well. I think it's the same there as well. Am I right? That the race director speaks and you hear it and it's clear for everyone. And I thought that was brilliant. Again, watching, it's brilliant, because how often are we watching Formula One screaming at the TV? What is happening?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I do think that's a good thing. It's just it's transparent, isn't it? Everyone can see what's happening. I think in a world where I was a racing driver, I think though that I would be like really sort of frustrated in sometimes how long it takes to say what's happening. You know, I imagine myself in the car, and then he comes onto the radio and he's like, well, this has happened in turn 2, and I think I'd want to know really quickly, you know, car crashed in turn 3. You know, that's the only thing I would say about that. I think that there's yeah, it doesn't seem to say it very quickly, and then I also think, is there potentially a language barrier issue, you know, but they must all be able to understand what's happening.
I think there's a thing in motor racing, you have, like, English has to be the first language, whichever nationality you are. So we're quite lucky that we obviously speak English as our first language. So whether you be an Italian driver, you have to learn English to hold that license, which, as I say, seems forced, but it's so that someone can step in and say, I can communicate with everyone because I speak this one language. Yeah, he's been in charge of Formula E since 2016 as well. I had to look this up today. I don't just know this off the top of my head, of course. But I thought I'll look this up because I've not heard any bad word about Scott Elkin. It's not coming in the news like he's under fire, or will he lose his job, or he made a bad call, will he make a better call next time out? It's not a name you know, apart from the fact it comes up on the screen saying Scott Elkins, your race director, talking. And I thought, since 2016, that's nearly 10 years now, no controversy. He's doing a good job.
Yeah, you only hear about people in that position when something's happened, and it's normally something that isn't good or something a little bit controversial.
Yes, yeah, unfortunately, but we, as Formula One fans, we know far too much about controversy, so I'm going to skip away from that now. I just thought I'd leave it as a positive note for Formula E. If you want racing that doesn't have controversy, then Formula E might be your bet on that. So once that first safety car ended, it was Oliver Rowland that, as it ended, he had 2 minutes left, perhaps, of attack mode, and this just was pure chance, pure luck. He's sitting in fourth place. The cars ahead of him don't have attack mode. Attack mode in Formula E, by the way, gives you 50 kilowatts extra as you're driving, but it also gives you four-wheel drive, which meant he came off the final corner, just slung it down the inside. I think it was of Jake Dennis. And then he had to the two Porsches up ahead, and he managed to overtake all three of those cars in one lap. So again, if you're watching Formula One and going, I want to see more overtaking, then Formula E's the place, right?
Yeah, it was, yeah, certainly a very well timed safety car, I think, on his part. But the way he maximized that opportunity just in time as well before the second safety car, you know, that that was incredible, and certainly made him worthy of that win. Maximizing the opportunities, that's what drivers have to do in racing. I do think though, like that drive, that one lap to get to the front was amazing, but I do think there's a lot of luck there. Although he had just taken attack mode when the safety car came out, so he should have had 6 minutes of it.
That's right. Yeah, that's what he said. You sort of save it. Do you save yourself some for later on? So whether he took the 2 minutes the first time he took it, thinking, do you know what, late safety car, then maybe I'm quids in. But it's more than likely he just felt, no, later on the race, I want to be able to push, especially those people that have only left themselves 2 minutes, or even those that did the 4-and-4 split. So it paid off. Next time it might not, but again, how often do we say that? Again, as McLaren fans, we have to look back to Miami just last year. Lando Norris taking his first win, and there was all the talk, was he only the winner because of luck? Well, sometimes you make your own luck, and I think this was another one of those cases. Oliver Rowland had one lap to get this done. He put himself in the position where he had that lap, and then he absolutely took it.
Yeah, I agree. Their strategy was to take a big chunk of attack mode late on in the race, and it paid off for them. Another day, maybe it wouldn't.
Yeah, that I think takes us on to the sort of end of the race there, because there are other days and there are other seasons gone by where attack mode was more of a negative. And I think, again, the changes to it this year, there was talk about it being perhaps too easy to overtake. But as opposed to previous years where you'd lose two positions, but then only be able to get one of them back, it was good to see everyone using it and trying to use it as an aggressor, not as I've got to do this. And the other thing was, in this race, there wasn't really much of a finish where they're all pushing the very finite of the battery. Everyone finished with at least like 1 or 2%, which, if you're watching Formula E as a regular, you think that's low. That is absolutely loads. They're normally pushing it right down to the final 0.1%. So that was something I noticed, that everyone was steady at the finish, just able to push all the way to the end.
Yeah. Do you think there was an element of not being sure whether there would be more laps added on at the end of the race? There weren't any laps added on at the end of the race, but I don't know how touch and go it was, and whether there was a bit of battery saving going on there, in case any laps were added on, I suppose, is my only comment on that.
Yeah, so again, for those that haven't follow Formula E, when there's a safety car in the race of so many laps, then they add those laps back on, because obviously they can save so much battery that then it will take away that battery element if they then just let them go green with the same amount of laps. So because there was 2 different safety car periods and both of them were, I think, 2 laps, they didn't have to add any on, but it's very clear in the rules what they add on. I think a few years ago they weren't clear. They sort of decided as and when and went, do you know what? Yeah, maybe let's just add one. And there was that race at Valencia, I think it was, where it was an utter farce. You had half the drivers disqualified because they didn't have the battery. So there was probably an element of leaving some battery if they had to do one extra lap. But generally, I just think the nature of late safety cars, as it was here, just allowed them that bit of capacity that meant they could push from that point onwards to the finish. So it was good to see, and no one running out of battery at the end, and no controversy or no false finish as we have seen. So that takes us to the end of like the race review, and as I say, we're talking about these as Formula One fans. So our overall thoughts on Formula E, sorry, as 2 Formula E fans are probably going to be swayed slightly, but in terms of entertainment, I think it's pretty high. I think you'd agree, Amy. It was a very entertaining,
but also still a little confusing.
yes.
I suppose. Yeah, is what I'd say. I'll be watching more Formula E this year. It is no longer behind a paywall, so I can watch every race. So I think my knowledge will improve, and I might start to get used to the strategies a little bit more as the season progresses.
We'll definitely come back to Formula E on this podcast. As I say, unfortunately, Ray can't join us, but this was going to be one where this was going to be a series where she wasn't watching it before this year, and then I got a text just before Sao Paulo to say, right, what am I watching for? And I went, excellent, right. So there's another one brought into the ranks, and yes, we'll be coming back to that. So we'll hear what Ray has to say on it. But yes, it was definitely entertaining. It's a little bit of confusion, and again, hopefully, if they bring in attack charge, maybe that changes it. So we'll look at that the next time, see if it's any less confusing, if it's even more confusing, which I think leads us to talk about strategy. As I touched on, I think there's probably more strategy in Formula E than in Formula One. I don't know if you agree with that. That it, as I say, you not only do you have to take 2 modes, but you can then choose whether you take 2 and 6 minutes, 4 and 4, or 6 and 2.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think the nature of Formula One sometimes means the strategy is laid out for you. There's a lot more as fans guessing going on about what teams are going to go for in Formula E.
Yeah, and another aspect going into we haven't really spoken about in great detail is the skill that the drivers have to employ here is very different to Formula One, where they have to watch what they're doing before, like we're talking even before attack mode comes into it, but how they lift and coast. So we're talking every single lap, how they approach a corner, how they lift, regen some energy as they do so, or do they brake late to try and get the move done. So there's definitely a very different skill set required to be a Formula E driver to being a Formula One driver. Obviously, if you're a quick driver, you're going to be quick in any racing series. But yeah, again, when we come back to it, that's one thing. Hopefully, we'll discuss then is the skill set, and finally the presentation, like the how it came across on TV. I think again, it's well put together. It's a well oiled machine now with the presenting team that we had, and the information on the screen. You know, we have that stack on there. There's a lot of information put out on screen. So I was really happy with how it's all put together now. The presentation of Formula E.
Yeah, I think I'm actually really looking forward to the next race or the next 2 races because it's a double header, and actually not having any plans that weekend, so I can sit down and watch both days from start to finish. And see some of that presentation as well, that you're talking about, and not skipping straight to the race as well. But yeah, looking forward to the next few.
Admittedly, I used to do that, the skip ahead. And a very small point here, going back to the London ePrix, I got stopped by Alexa Rendell, and I'm going to shout out her name here because I said to her, I should recognize who you are. I should know who you are. You're a presenter, clearly. She went, oh, I'm just a presenter. She didn't tell me her name, but since found out who she was, because watching the ePrix, suddenly like, she's a TV presenter. She's not just social media. She actually is on the TV. So I thought, oh my god, I'm supposed to know who this is. And if I watched the pre-race build-up, I would have known exactly who I was talking to. So shout out to Alexa, you're doing a brilliant job. And don't be so modest. When someone says I should know who you are, say yes, I'm Alexa, follow me, and big up my career, because she's doing amazing things. But I think that wraps up our review of Formula E and the Mexico ePrix. Amy, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
No, certainly. Thank you for having me. I'm gonna look forward to seeing what you guys say about the next few racing series that you decide to follow.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Next week, it's possibly, hopefully, the review of Dakar, which has been on for 2 weeks, and I've been following it. And honestly, I still don't feel like I know very much about it. I was in my comfort zone in Formula E. I'm very much looking forward to being put very much out of my comfort zone, talking about a series that I've heard a lot about but never seen much of. So yeah, as I say, an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for filling in, and yeah, please keep an eye out on what we have coming up. But for now, this was the Motorsport Review. Thank you, and good day.
Bye.